now. We cannot break free from this. There is no hope of breaking free. And this is where Moses' famous instruction to the people of God comes in verses 13 and 14, right? Three instructions he gives to the people of God in this dire moment, in this moment where they feel like all hope is lost. And when over and over again, we read this phrase, do not be afraid, right? Like somewhere it's been said that there's 365 instances of this, one for each and every day. I don't know if that's true or not, but there's enough that it could be. And whether or not there's actually 365 or there's a few less or there probably is even more, one of the things we know is that it is an overwhelming theme all throughout Scripture that God calls God's people to not be afraid in the face of fearful things. But did you know that in nearly every instance that we read God's people being called to do not be afraid, that these words are uttered because God is about to move or act? See, there's this thing in the Old Testament. We see it in the New Testament, but it has a different kind of terminology. But in the Old Testament, there's this phrase that's often used, scholars use it, and it's this word theophany. There's these instances of God revealing God's self in a mighty way. The burning bush is a theophany, all right? God on Mount Sinai with thunder and clouds, it's a theophany. The pillar of smoke, the pillar of fire, theophany. The temple, the Holy of Holies, theophany. These are occasions where God reveals God's self in this mighty way, so much so that there can literally be nothing else than God in God's self showing up on behalf of God's people. And did you know that in almost every single occurrence of a theophany in Scripture, every time we can point to here's God showing up in a mighty way, that it's accompanied with this do not be afraid. And so Moses is not telling these people, hey, buck up, pick yourselves up by the bootstraps and stop being afraid. As much as what Moses is telling God's people is, God's about to do something. God is on the move here. So stop living in fear because you don't know the whole story. You haven't seen yet what God has up God's sleeve to do in this circumstance. So stop living in the fear of what you can see and live in awe of what you can't. Because when God shows up in mighty ways. Do not be afraid. Then he says, stand firm. Again, it's like literally everything in my bones is telling me to tuck tail and run. Right? Even though I don't have anywhere to run. I mean, you know what happens to cockroaches when you turn the light on. That's what we do when we're scared. We scurry and we just look for cover everywhere we can go. We don't care what it is. We're just running and hiding. This fight or flight kicks in, and for most of us, it's flight, not fight. Because who's going to fight Egypt? Who's going to stand against Pharaoh and all that Pharaoh has at Pharaoh's disposal when Pharaoh is coming full charge and you're Pharaoh's target? No, flight kicks in and they're running and they're hiding and they're squirming and they're looking. That's everything in their bones is screaming out. Run, hide, duck, seek cover, find refuge. And Moses says, no, stand your ground. Plant your feet and stand up and stand fast in the face of what's coming at you. Do not be moved. Which means it's got to be something bigger than us. And then, and most importantly, he says, and see. Now, Israel probably thinks they're seeing just fine at this point, don't you think? No, we see Moses. We look back. We saw what's coming. It's not good. We looked ahead. Here's a big river too big to cross. Here's water too deep for us to get through. We're stuck. We're surrounded. Like, what should we see? Because everything we see is not what we want or hope to see. But when Moses says and see, he's not saying see what's